My grandmaster, who was born and raised in Seoul, South Korea, once told me of his experience as a child with black-eyed children, and it was more disturbing than I could have ever imagined. He was about 9 years old and was out with his family at a festival in Seoul. He was passing by some carts that held fireworks, toys, and food. As he was passing by some of the festival carts and stands, he noticed 2 children in an alleyway some distance from him, a boy and a girl. 2 children with black eyes were staring back at him, just out of full view. He was distracted by them momentarily, but his parents urged him onward through the festival area. Later that night, he noticed something outside of the door of his room where he slept. The same 2 black-eyed children had been watching him intently. He stared at them for quite some time before blinking and realized they had vanished. The next night he went by and saw them again, but further away this time, hiding in some nearby bushes. Once again, he stared at them until they left. On the 3rd day, he started out expecting to see them, but never did. He closed his eyes and fell asleep, thinking it was over. However, on the 4th night, the children had arrived back at his doorstep again, and were angry.
"Why did you not look for us? Do you not like us?"
He responded to them out of fear and said, I couldn't see you." The children each responded separately to him. The boy, the one who spoke first, spoke again, and then the girl did as well.
"Well, now you see us, and now you don't."
My master went to bed that night thinking that it would all be over for him if he could not find them again the next night, but they never came back. He waited up several nights after, but they never returned. He remembers this story to this very day, not because of his own experiences, but because of the experience he heard from the others who were at the festival he went to that year, and those who didn't return the next. There is a tradition amongst the black-eyed children of Seoul. They choose a few children at every great festival to watch, and if the children do not watch for them or look for them at night, then they will never be seen again, likely doomed to have their souls trapped and become black-eyed children themselves. The warning he left to me, and to anyone else for that matter who reads or hears this story, is this: avoid making eye contact with the black-eyed children, because the night you no longer see them, no one else will ever see you again.
Last summer, I heard about them. The Black-Eyed Children were my favorite ghost story, and quite honestly, until last night, I thought that's exactly what they were. Most of the stories I've read take place in remote towns across the Midwest region of America. I live on the East Coast of America, so I figured I was safe from the phenomena happening to me. Most of the stories, for those that don't know, involve 2 children, usually an older girl and a little boy looking for help to get home. Sometimes the stories happen at night, sometimes early morning just before sunrise. My event happened at 1:04 a.m. Sunday, June 1st. I had been watching a science fiction double feature at my neighbor's house. It was me, and let's call them Zeke and Harry. His house is exactly a quarter mile away, so I had walked over expecting to have some drinks and watch the movies. All in all, it was a successful night up to that point. After the movie ended, Zeke kicked Harry and I out, saying that he had a Tinder date in the morning and needed to rest. Harry and I left and started walking home together. Harry's house was in the middle of Zeke and my house. He offered me a cigarette, and I turned him down as we chatted about some of our respective year away at university. He offered me a ride home the rest of the way, but it was a decent night, so I turned him down. What was I thinking? As I got to the end of the street to the T intersection, I turned right to get to my house. I noticed a weird vibration in the air. It was making my fillings, resonate in my mouth. It was pretty unpleasant, and that's when I saw the first pair. Coming out from behind the house directly ahead of me were two pale children. Goosebumps shot up my spine. At this point it was 1 a.m. and I was a little creeped out, so I decided to jog the rest of the way home. The closer I got to my house, the more children I saw. They were fucking everywhere, hundreds of them coming from every direction, all with strange black eyes. All of them were crying out for help. Help us, help us, help us. I ran as hard as I could to make it home. All the children were converging on me as I ran, and I had to dodge a couple of them from touching me. I struggled with my keys as I got to the door, and I could feel a small hand brushing the cloth of my shirt. As I ran inside and slammed the door behind me, I expected my parents and brother to come out and see what the commotion was, but no one did. I ran upstairs to wake them, but couldn't find anyone. I ran to my room, which was in the basement, glancing back outside to see a horde of children just standing staring at my house. Once I got to my room, I tried using my phone and laptop, but neither could connect to any network or got any sort of signal. I sat with my favorite knife, and I guess at some point, I fell asleep. I was awoken by my dad, who needed some help with yard work. He says he was asleep in bed with my mom all night and has told me several times to stop making up stories. I fear for tonight.
It all began on a beautiful day at the beginning of autumn in 1998. I live in a small town called Gratham in Lincolnshire, United Kingdom. I was out with a couple of friends and it was coming up to the end of the summer holidays. I was at my friend's house when I decided to nip home to get a drink. My two friends walked down with me as it was only around the corner, a 5-minute walk to my house. I went in and they waited outside for me, or so I thought. While I was inside, I had a real thirst and drank about 3 pints of water before going back out to my friends. When I went back out, there was no sign of my friends. I looked up and down the street for them. Down the street, about 4 houses down from mine, there were a couple of large trees about 18 feet high overhanging the fence at the front. As I looked down, I saw 2 pairs of legs, as if 2 people were backed up in the tree, hiding. I automatically thought it was my friends messing around, so I started walking down, shouting that I could see them and to stop messing around. As I shouted to them, they sort of jumped over the fence where the trees were, a feat on its own really, came out on the other side of the trees and weirdly jumped over the next fence into the next door garden. I say weirdly as in the way they jumped. It was more like a dive rather than climbing. When they entered the next garden, they went to a gate at the side of the property, which was about 8 feet high, and proceeded to dive jump that too. I didn't understand how they had done that, but I still wasn't fazed by it and shouted again for them to stop messing around. Then I had an idea. I'd go down quickly and catch them when they come out of the next garden. I proceeded on to the next garden and couldn't believe what I was looking at. There in the garden stood 2 people. At first, they looked really odd. There was a man about 50 wearing a large trench coat that went down nearly to his feet. I could see he had large black boots on. As my eyes moved up, I saw his hands. They were very pale, and I noticed that his fingernails were very long, like claws, and they were really dirty, like a yellow color. Next, I saw his head. It was bald on top, and at the sides had long black greasy hair down to his shoulders. Its mouth was open enough to show sharp yellow teeth, and it had a large pointed nose. That's when I noticed the eyes. Jet black eyes that you would never believe if you hadn't seen them. I instantly froze on the spot. It felt like time froze. No one was around, nothing moved, no wind, and all I could do was stare into its eyes, and I knew it was staring right back at me. I was aware of the other one near it. He was younger and dressed in more modern clothes of the time, as in trainers, popper trousers, a blue puffer jacket, and a baseball cap. I didn't see that one's face, as I was stuck staring into those deep, endless pits that were the eyes of the first thing. I will tell you now that I have never, ever felt so terrified in all my life. After what felt like hours, I managed to break the gaze and run home. When I got indoors, I cried my eyes out. I think it was the shock, the horror of knowing these things are wandering around in broad daylight. I never knew what they were until last night when I discovered the stories of black-eyed children. After reading some of the stories, I realized I was quite lucky that it wasn't a nighttime door visit, and I hope I never experience it again.
Let me preface this by saying, I am by no means a writer, just a domestic engineer living in North Texas. Also, I don't believe in paranormal ghosts, demons, or aliens or whatever. However, I did have an event happen to me this Halloween. I have to admit, it's had me scratching my head ever since. So it had been a slow trick-or-treat night in our neighbourhood that evening, which is pretty odd in itself. We usually have kids from different areas drop off in ours and constantly parade at our door. That night, I'd say we had no more than 8 to 10 groups of kids. It was around 9:30, and my husband and I were sitting in our family room watching some of the ghost shows based on, supposedly, actual events. Like I said, I don't believe in that kind of stuff, but I do like a good ghost story now and then, and it is Halloween after all. We hadn't had any activity at the door in over half an hour. It was getting late, so we decided to turn the porch light on and let our dog Chloe out of her crate. Chloe is an American bulldog and is very docile. We only put her in the crate because we were afraid she'd try and get out and play with all the other kids, and I didn't want to have to chase after her down the street. I also didn't want her scaring or intimidating the kids, because she can be a little scary. So I turned the outside light off, let Chloe out, and she followed me back to the couch and lay down on my feet. It was getting close to 10 PM when my husband decided he'd had enough fun for the night and was going to go upstairs, take a shower, and get ready for bed. After all, it was Thursday, and he still had to get up early for the next day. Our teenage son was out with his friends at the local haunted house and wasn't expected back for at least another hour or so. So that left me alone on the couch with Chloe. Now, just because I don't believe doesn't mean that those shows don't freak me out a bit. And being alone now, I have to say I was kind of on edge watching the TV. It wasn't long until I heard the upstairs shower turn on, when the light came on in the patio. Knock, knock, knock at the front door. My initial reaction was, what the hell? Really? It's almost 10. Go home. But soon an uneasy feeling came over me. Why the knock? Our doorbell glows in the dark, and without the porch light, it would have been extra obvious to everyone there. I paused. I couldn't really just ignore it. Our front door had a big glass panel, and everyone right by the door could easily see inside and know that I was just sitting there watching TV. It would have been rude for me not to answer. Just before I get up, knock, 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 again from the door. I glanced down at Chloe, but she was gone. My gaze followed her usual path to the front door, expecting her to be on her way there as she normally does. Nothing. She wasn't there. I stood up to look around the room and found her crouching by the back door, like she was wanting out. However, she needed to ask to go out like that. She always comes to lick my hand or puts her head on my knee. This was very out of character for her, and I have to say it heightened my anxiety. "Chloe? Crate," I said. She just turned back to look at me like, "Hell no, lady. I ain't moving." I yelled up to my husband, but if he was already in the shower, I knew there was no chance of him hearing me. Knock, knock, knock. About the time a car drove by our street and cast enough light on the door for me to see the silhouettes of two small children through the glass. I instantly felt relief. It was just some kids, probably a couple off my neighborhood on their way back home and wanted to stop by and show me their costumes or something. I headed for the door and looked back to make sure Chloe wasn't following. What a great watchdog, I thought I had to myself. She just sat there. I turned on the porch light when I got to the door, and sure enough I could see through the glass. It was a couple of pretty small kids. A little late for such young ones, I thought, and began to wonder about what kind of parents would let their kids run around the streets this late at night. I opened the door, enough to see where I could block Chloe's escape if she decided to grow some balls, which was only about 2 feet. What struck me immediately as odd was that the kids weren't wearing any costumes. They were wearing normal street clothes. Also, no customary trick or treat either. I began to feel very uneasy. It was a girl and a boy. The girl to my left was older, I'd say around 11 or 12. I could tell she was blonde, but I couldn't make out any distinct features, as our lights are from high above and on the columns at the front of the porch, so most of the light was coming from behind them. I had not opened the door wide enough for any of the light to come inside and hit them. The boy was younger, about a foot shorter, and between 8 or 9 I'd say, and looked to have light brown hair. The girl very politely spoke up. "Ma'am, can we please come inside and use your phone to call our mother?" As she spoke, something in the pit of my stomach was telling me that something was wrong. What kid, even at that age, doesn't have a cell phone of their own these days? I couldn't remember the last time I'd had anyone ask me to use my home phone. Hun? Don't you have a phone of your own that you can call your mum on?" I asked this, and that is when things got really weird. Both kids turned to look at one another, as if they were going to say something, but neither ever spoke. They both turned back to me and the girl said, "Ma'am, my cell phone battery doesn't have any charge left in it. Can we please come inside and call our mother? We're alone out here, and my brother is scared." I have to admit, there were two competing feelings going on inside me. The first, that of a mother's heart and wanting to help these two small children get to their mother. The other, a sinking fear in my gut that was keeping the other feeling at bay. It was then I noticed that during the short conversation I'd already opened the door a few extra inches, which I was completely unaware of doing. I stopped. "Honey, why don't you give me your mother's number and I can call her myself?" Another pause, and they looked at each other again. After a short moment they turned back to me and the girl said, "Ma'am, my little brother has to use your bathroom. Can we please come inside whilst you call our mother?" And with that last statement, the little girl moved closer to the door, almost as if she was going to walk in. As she did, she stepped into the light coming from inside the house, and I got my first real good look at her. Solid, jet black eyes. That's all I could see. That motherly instinct was gone and replaced by terror I don't think I've ever felt before in my life. I could feel every hair on my arm and back of my neck standing at attention. I closed the door to where my face was just able to stick out. The little girl stopped again and pleaded, "Please, ma'am, we're really scared and alone out here. We have to come inside. Please, help us." Then, like on cue, Both kids began to whimper and cry. That's when the fear took over, and I shut and locked the door. "I'll call your mum if you give me the number," I shouted through the door. "But I'm not letting you in my house." I could still see them standing there on the porch, just staring at me through the Bellevue glass pane. Part of me wanted to run upstairs to my husband, but the bigger part didn't want to lose track of where they were. That would have freaked me out even more, to know that they were not there. After what seemed like forever, but probably a few seconds, I decided to call my neighbor that lived across the street, as I made my way to the side table by our couch to get my phone. I glanced back to the door. Chloe was nowhere to be found. We later found her in the guest room under the bed. When I got my phone and started to look for his contact info, it was when the kids had stepped away from the door and had begun walking into the street. As they did, I walked to the door to get a better look of who they were and where they went, still not calling my neighbor. If you get close enough to the glass, you can see out enough detail to make out people's shapes, but you couldn't see much detail. Of course, standing that close to the door would make you pretty obvious to anyone looking in. From the door, I could see that the kids were standing under the street lamp, nearest my house, staring at me. As I lifted the phone to my ear after calling them, only then did the kids start walking down our street. I met my neighbor out under the lamp once he was out there, but the kids were nowhere to be seen. Like I said, I don't believe in any of this stuff, and had never even heard about black-eyed kids before talking to my friend. What I really think, what I have to think, is that these kids were just yanking people's chains on Halloween night. But I will say this for them: they were really, really good at it, and they scared the shit out of me and my dog, black-eyed kid or not.
Reading the stories, I had always been a skeptic. Stories, alleged first-hand experiences, hauntings, possessions. They are all well and good for a quick chill, a cheap thrill, something I read to get my heart rate up. Getting scared can be fun sometimes, as long as you don't overdo it. Just a little something silly to get worked up about. In my lurking in books, and on numerous sites on the internet, credible or not, I have come across many a story or account about ghosts, demons, the Jersey Devil, you name it. Recently I have found my way into stories about BEK, or black-eyed kids. No, these children did not get a black eye from a fight. I don't believe there would be a soul out there with the backbone to try and attack these kids. No, BEKs are kids. If that was not straightforward enough, usually, from all the accounts I have read, in their teenage years, if they even physically age at all, their eyes are pitch black. No pupils, no corneas, no white showing at all. Pitch black. They have olive skin and wear run-of-the-mill clothing, as in hoodies. However, in a non-physical sense, they always bring with them an overwhelming sense of fear and dread. They are all intriguing, and when approached by them, again, from all the accounts I've come across, it's like you are in a slight hypnosis, though you quickly snap out of it when your instincts take over, usually as you meet their eyes. Then there are the theories about what these BEKs might be. These theories range from lost souls to alien human hybrids and even to vampires, though the latter may be an extreme stretch to link the BEK to the current social infatuation of vampires found commonly in young persons. In light of all this, I have always been a very fact-based person. If its existence was not apparent, or the existence of the thing in question was not testable and verifiable to me, it did not exist. However, one night, one long, terrifying night, which still haunts me to this very day, showed me the proof and required me to open my eyes and mind. My story begins when I left my mom's house. I had gone over to visit because my father, her husband of 63 years, recently passed away, and Mom wasn't taking it too well. I knew she needed support from her loved ones, and I was more than willing to go visit and keep her company, but it was getting late. My mom lives in the suburbs, tidy lawns, plenty of neighbors, paved roads, and even though it was near 11 p.m. when I left, the streets were extremely lit by the streetlights, who always had your safety and ease of mind at heart. These lights only lit the road, though, and glancing across the street, the houses were cast in eerie shadow. Even a rather safe, charming little neighborhood can seem spooky and uninviting when cast in shadow. I admit, I was terribly chilled. Sliding into my car, I revved the engine and waved to my mother, who was standing in the doorway, wrapped comfortably in a warm shawl. She waved back, her old and fragile arm shaking. I saw her mouth, "Be careful," and I smiled, backing out of the driveway. I turned out of the neighborhood, deciding to take the back way, the shorter way, home tonight. In hindsight, that might have not been a good idea. I live a significant ways away, out in the middle of the country in the old farmhouse I grew up in, which my father had left in my name when he and Mum moved out into a place smaller, more easy for care and affordable, and social. He, my father, had always told me growing up,
"Don't go out at night and always beware the devils."
He was a strong believer in anything and everything paranormal, a very superstitious man, and I always had to resist the urge to laugh at his words, but I knew he meant well. Driving down the dark country roads, there were no streetlights, and the half-assed paved road was cracked and filled with potholes. The fields on either side of the road were empty, just blank stretches of overgrown grass and untended shrubbery. The dark outline of the trees of the woods could be seen looming all the way across the fields on the shadowy horizon. One might even have seen a deer or two once in a while in those fields, but not tonight. The moon offered little light, as the sky rolled with dark, threatening clouds, ready to burst with rain or storm at any moment. Sure enough, a few moments later, the low grumble of thunder sounded, heavy and long. However, no rain fell just yet, much to my pleasure. I hate driving at night and in the rain, and putting those two together would end badly. I just knew it. Accompanied by the occasional roll of thunder, I started to feel a bit anxious. I can't explain it. I just felt shaken up, probably because it was night and it could start raining. Or maybe I had been reading too many ghost stories and legends, and tonight seemed to reflect the mood of the stories I read almost obsessively. To try and calm myself, I flicked on my old car's radio and turned the old-fashioned knob back and forth, slowing down a bit as I attempted to find a station that came in clearly. Nothing doing. Weird. There was a broadcasting tower right near here. It usually came in perfectly, clear as day. But still nothing. The white noise and static of the blank stations was doing nothing to appease my anxiety. I gripped the steering wheel tightly as more thunder boomed from the sky. Aggravated, I forcefully shut off the radio, gritting my teeth. Glancing down at the dashboard, I noticed I was nearly out of gas. Groaning, I searched the road for a sign for gas. As I was scanning the side of the road, I noticed from the corner of my eye 2 figures walking on the side of the road, shrouded in shadow. They were walking slowly. One turned around, walking backwards, his or her thumb sticking out. I felt compelled to pull over, give them a ride, and I found my hands turning the wheel slightly, but I pulled back, realizing how stupid it would be of me to accept 2 random strangers into my car in the middle of the night on a back country road. I sped up and past them, trying not to look at them. As I did so, though, I felt oddly intrigued by them. As I focused on the road ahead, it started drizzling, dropping my mood another level or 2. Along with the rain, the thunder seemed louder, closer as the storm moved in. A few seconds passed until I gave in to my compulsion to look at the 2 figures, and I glanced in my rearview mirror. It seemed as if the 2 were walking faster, and the one no longer had his thumb out, but it had to be my imagination. How would I be able to tell if they were walking faster or not? It was rainy and dark. Looking back at the road, I almost missed a sign that alerted me of a gas stop up ahead. A sigh of relief passed my lips, and I slowed down, looking for my indication of the stop, pushing the thought of the two figures from my head. Soon, I was pulling into the gas station slowly as the rain started to pick up. The store was closed, but luckily they had a 24-hour gas pump service. That was good for me, as if they had not, I'd have run out a few more miles down the road. I shut off my car and hesitantly shuffled out of the metal shell and glanced over my shoulder, still not being able to shake that nervous feeling that had manifested inside of me earlier that night. I stood under the light of the overhang, trying to figure out how to work the pump, which seemed so overcomplicated in the dim light and with my mind not being able to focus on this simple task. The rain picked up more, heavier and louder against the concrete of the gas stop as I finally was able to get the pump into my car, forcing my hand to stop its shaking. I had a horrible feeling that my shaking wasn't just because of the bittery, cold night air. Suddenly, the overhang lights of the gas stop started flickering wildly, a couple going out altogether. It seemed as if the temperature dropped 20 degrees in a few seconds as I glanced around, a sinking feeling starting to blossom in my stomach. As if in slow motion, I turned around, facing back towards the road, the long, lonely road, and I saw what I expected to see there. But even as much as I knew what I'd see, I still felt the drop of my stomach, the color draining from my face, and I breathed a sharp, cold breath forcefully as it almost caught in my throat. Across the street, the two figures were standing, facing me. They started crossing the street slowly but surely, and I fumbled with the gas pump. It had only been a few moments, but it seemed as if the gas pump was taking its precious time. I was shaking hard now, as thunder boomed once more, and I looked back up. The figures were now at the entrance to the gas stop, and my breath was quick and shallow as I blindly shoved the pump back into its holder, not being able to tear my eyes away from the figures. As they drew closer, I became more frantic, even though, now as they walked into the flickering light of the overhang, I saw they were just two teenagers. They looked ragged and frigid and soaked from the rain. I straightened up a bit, still terrified, but another compulsive feeling, similar to the one I experienced in the car, was bubbling, and I felt obligated to talk to these two, though I insisted to myself to just drive away, not to risk anything. They were extremely close now, at the next pump when I slid into my car, shaking wildly, and fumbled for my keys, cursing myself as I dropped them on the floor. Leaning down, I swiped them up and sat back up. A cold, sickening feeling as I came face to face with one of the teens, who had his hands on my window, knocking slowly but forcefully. I rolled down the window a bit, just a bit, no bigger than to allow maybe a small child's hand through. Before I spoke, he spoke first. The other figure was standing in the background, still, but I could see something of a grin there on her pale face.
Can you give us a ride into town? We missed the bus and don't have a ride.
He spoke slow, and something about his voice made me shiver. A cold chill swept down my spine and I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Clearing my throat, I glanced at the dashboard and the keys in my hand. I'm sorry, but I'm not going into town, I stuttered, keeping my eyes down, not at the kids. However, the teenager knocked harder and made me jump a little, as he insisted another time for a ride. I told him no once more and looked up, trying to seem intimidating, which seems silly, trying to seem intimidating to a child. But a horrible, chilling sight greeted me. I looked the kid right in the eyes and gasped sharply, my back hitting my seat as I went to back away. He had eyes. Oh, he did. But they were blacker than the night. Pitch black. No discernible pupils and no white whatsoever showing. Pure black. Deep, brooding, and surprisingly intriguing, But my fear got the better of me, and I quickly turned the key and my engine revved to life. I thanked God, which I had never, ever done before tonight. My car had not stalled, and I went to pull away, and the kid banged on my window with a pale fist, screaming for a ride. I took off speedily down the road, apologizing to my father again and again. I had laughed at him, never took his warning seriously. After a few more minutes, I pulled into my driveway and right onto my lawn, in front of my porch. I didn't want to spend any more time outside than I already had, and jumped from the car, leaving the door open, and ran inside, slamming the door and locking it, even going as far to put a chair in front of the door in case someone, or something, tried to get in. Sinking into the chair in front of the door, I shivered uncontrollably and started to cry, hiding my face in my hands as two dark figures stood at the end of my driveway.